This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Okay, welcome everybody to the first ever live in-person Test Case Scenario podcast. I am your host, Jason Baum, and with me are my co-hosts, Nikolay Advolodkin, Evelyn Coleman, and Marcus Merrell. Give it up for them. Come on, come on.
Live audience.
Let's quickly go down the line, say something about yourself. It could be anything. And then we have some special guests. It's not a surprise to the people in the room, but maybe it's a surprise to you, or it's not because we have empty chairs. So I'm Jason Baum. Like I said, I am the host of the Test Case Scenario podcast. I am also the head of community DevRel for Sauce Labs. And yeah, go ahead, Nikolay.
Hi, I'm Nikolay. I've introduced myself enough. Instead, I'm going to do a quick Arnold Schwarzenegger voice. Everybody get in the chopper.
It's not really an impression as much as like a slight variation of what you already sound like.
But it sounds good.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Coleman. I manage implementation engineering here at Sauce Labs, and I am a former solutions architect along with Nikolay and Marcus and Titus and folks. So happy to be here.
Yay.
It's fine. It's fine.
Go ahead, Marcus.
Hi, Marcus Merrell. I'm on the product marketing team. I used to run the solution architect team here at Sauce Labs, and I just moved to the Bay Area 8 months ago, and I love it.
Awesome. So for those unfamiliar, Test Case Scenario is a podcast sponsored by Sauce Labs. And we're on YouTube, we're on every podcast location you could possibly find. I don't really know where we are. I know we're everywhere, but we're everywhere. We put out an episode every week. For the most part, except holidays. And yeah, so what we talk about on the show pretty much varies from anything testing related to completely not testing related. One of our recent episodes, I think we talked about testing dating apps on Valentine's Day. We talked about a lot of stuff on this show. So I know we had like a really in-depth conversation on the Vision OS with Matt Clark. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, please tune in. I'm guessing you've seen it because you're watching it right now. And now let's just get to our guests. So with us are three really well-respected individuals in the testing community, you could say. Maintainers of a couple of open source frameworks that are, I'd say, pretty popular. What do you guys say? Pretty popular?
So-so.
Yeah, so-so. Let's bring them up one at a time. How about that? And make them feel really uncomfortable. He's the lead of the technical leadership committee of Selenium, which, by the way, is used by like tens of millions of people. Let's give a huge round of applause to Diego Molina. And next up, I have a hard time. You want to introduce him? Why don't you introduce him?
He is a wonderful human being. He's a male. He wears shoes and pants. He works with WebDriver, and he is an amazing human being from Germany, and a maintainer and creator of WebDriver.io. Welcome to Christian Bromann.
And I guess last up, Evelyn, do you want to introduce him?
I can try.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Absolutely. A close friend and colleague of mine who also works on the Selenium project and is the creator of the Water. Am I saying it right? Maintainer of Water and a wonderful advocate for testing excellence, Titus Fortner.
we just broke a record for most people on stage. Congrats, everybody. Yeah. So we are going to do our best to manage this many people with microphones as possible. 4 hosts, 3 guests. Why not? By the way, Test Case Scenario is a panel podcast, which is why there are so many hosts. I didn't really say that before. So let's just dive right in. We're going to ask these guys some questions about the frameworks that they work for, maybe the test automation industry as a whole, some trends and things like that. So, and then we want to take questions from you all because we don't really get an opportunity to get maintainers of incredibly popular frameworks like these on stage at once. So let's ask this first question. Marcus.
How have automated testing frameworks evolved in the last 5 years? And what key factors have driven those changes? Titus, do you want to take that?
In the last 5 years, there has been a much bigger focus on Chrome DevTools, and the new BiDi specification is probably the biggest change. Like Selenium 4 was released with that functionality 2 years ago. And WebDriver I/O keeps adding the latest and greatest support for all of the browsers. And so that's trying to get more interactive asynchronous communication with the different browsers instead of the traditional Selenium HTTP server synchronous interactions. It opens up a lot more opportunities.
Cool. I'm actually a little bit curious to know from Christian also, if you have a perspective, since you're probably going to have a bias for WebDriver I/O, but you're probably going to also have opinions on some of the others. I'm curious to know how you think.
I mean, when it comes to involvement, the biggest change I've seen that almost all frameworks have adopted a sense of component testing, running a single individual component and automate on top of that. We used to use things like JS DOM, which emulate a browser. But thanks to great tooling that we have out there, like the Vite project or Webpack that evolve over time, we have been able to kind of like load the component standalone in a browser and test on that, which helps to kind of like remove a bunch of end-to-end tests because we interact with a component as a standalone, so we don't need the whole application anymore. We can test a single component individually. I think that I've seen adopted across all the frameworks in the ecosystem.
Hey, Christian, I have a question for you. I just did a live stream about Netflix's new end-to-end testing library, Safe Test. And one of the most common questions I got there, and I've been getting, is what is component testing in the browser? How's it different from end-to-end testing? And why would we use component testing versus end-to-end testing?
Right. So the component testing is, instead of testing your whole application where you have to deploy it to some environment, you can just load one specific component into the browser and do basically unit testing in the browser. It's sometimes hard to define what end-to-end and integration and unit testing means. It's by definition, with component tests, you run unit tests in the browser, but it's somewhat end-to-end because you have to spin up a browser. So you can argue one way or the other, but the biggest difference, you test a component standalone. You don't have to worry about any other kind of component in the application. That can allow you to run tests much more efficient. If we look at the login, I can just mock the API and don't have to care about the backend. I just mimic the responses that I expect from the backend and just look at the UI component that mimics my login and just interact, do the UI test there and do a bunch of API tests for my backend. And then maybe have 1 or 2 full end-to-end tests that just check the whole application in its own. Makes run test much more faster and reliable.
Do you see people actually starting to take advantage of these features, or is it kind of slow to be adopted?
I mean, I don't have the usage numbers from other frameworks, but with WebDriver, I see a continuous growth. People start discovering that opportunity and jump on it. And especially with the mocking capabilities that WebDriver provides, there's just a huge gain of, it's much more developer friendly than having them to have to write an end-to-end test.
I have a take on the question, and I think it's a bit different to what was shared. And I think that there are like 2 variants of how they have evolved. One is what Christian and Titus were sharing, like adopting these dev tools and BiDi type of approach, so specialized frameworks on browsers. And now we have a variant where we have frameworks that want to do everything in one. So API testing, unit testing, browser testing. And I think this is kind of affecting the testing community because I see many testers not learning how to test, but learning how to use a tool, which is really affecting the industry in a way that I try to find places where I can use this tool and I don't apply my knowledge on approaching a problem where I can see, okay, with this type of testing, I can use something like component testing, and what is the tool for component testing? Then I can use, I don't know, something like Jest or whatever is around, right? Or like testing library that is maintained by Ken Dot? Kenzie Dot. So there is like two variants where like people are just blindly following one tool to use for everything. So what is like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And there's like another variant, which is the one I try to tell people to follow, like learn how to test and then choose your tool. I think that's the issue, what's happening with the evolution with frameworks these years.
Diego, while I totally agree with you there, I feel like it's almost always been like that in my perspective. And of course, I would love to hear what the panelists have said, because I remember when we were at Sauce Labs working as solution architects, and Selenium was the main and really pretty much the only player in the game. Everyone would use Selenium to test everything. I remember I would get requests of, how do I test a PDF with Selenium? Or how do I do API testing with Selenium? Do you guys not feel like it's always been like that? I mean, we've always been focused on tools over using good domain knowledge to make better decisions?
I honestly think it goes back even farther than that with Quick Test Professional and all sorts of stuff where they kept building functionality into it to the point where it became this giant monolith of VB script-based garbage. And yeah, I think you're right. You're absolutely right, Nikolay.
I think there was a more clear differentiation, at least when I got into testing. It was easier to understand what tools to use because we were attacking the problem first before adopting the tool. Yeah, I think I disagree because I feel that people were trying to understand the problem better before, like having a bit more patience before jumping into a solution, whereas I don't see that these days. But it's true, like I've seen also people who want to use the browser to test everything, so, but I kind of disagree with what you were saying, yeah.
My question is around these extra features and parts of the tools that people are pushing to be created and to be adopted. When you're looking at the requests that come through and the issues that get brought up in the open source community, do you feel that the push towards these features is coming directly from the testers themselves, or do you get a sense that these are requests like the PDF testing that are coming from above those individuals and they are just relaying the requirement for that feature?
Yeah, I see issues being posted across the board from people that directly use the tool and, have the knowledge on testing approaches, but also people that, developers that do component tests, they have specific needs for specific technical things. So it's very broad, and with WebDriver supporting a variant of like different types of tests, like extension, Electron, desktop testing. There's like, you see a lot of personas out there, and you try to provide value to the value to as much as you can to the best opportunities that you have out there. So it varies.
Yeah, I think Christian mentioned a key word, which is the persona. So as time evolves and there's more digital presence around, so there are more use cases. So PDF testing is perfectly understandable these days because you get your documents in a digital way. Or, I don't know, like testing like Face ID, things like that. It's something that is common these days. And that's why we see these requests, because there is a need. There is a real need for that.
Thank you. What are the current trends in automated testing, especially in relation to cloud-based platforms like Sauce Labs? And how are these trends shaping the development and testing processes? Go on, Titus.
I don't know. I feel like this is the same answer I gave last time. We're seeing users looking for the ability to set event listeners and interact more with the results that are happening in the application itself and not just via driver to the browser. We're looking for being able to do things like there are a number of things that used to work in a browser that don't anymore, like basic authentication, things that are limited, like setting cookies in domains that you're not on, and a lot of those things can be implemented by interacting directly with the application itself and not with the driver specifically.
I kind of think the elephant in this question is generative AI. I feel like that's kind of what it's asking for. I'm curious. I mean, that's certainly a trend I see. And I think that the industry is falling all over itself trying to replace the tester, which I still think is a very misguided way of looking at it, as opposed to assisting the tester.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I pretty much every talk I give, I talk about how maintenance costs are more expensive than both creation costs and execution costs combined. And I think AI right now, everyone's focused on using AI for creating tests. And I'm not saying that's not hard, because it can be, but it's not the thing that we need to optimize for best performance and best information from automated testing in general. We want something that is maintainable. And if the AI is trained on a lot of examples that are on the web right now, it is not the most maintainable code.
I think test creation is one thing. I feel where there's a big opportunities, especially for cloud vendors that have customer tests running on their cloud constantly, is just to take that information and create very valuable signals, because they know, the cloud vendor knows everything about the browser. They know which network requests come in and go out. And being able to just detect the differences between a set of tests that constantly run every day, I think there's a huge opportunity for a lot of those AI cases.
I agree 1,000%.
Yeah, I also think that so as much I focus on browser testing, I see there is a huge wave in mobile testing, so mobile apps where they were doing a lot of manual testing for things like, again, Face ID, or I don't know, like testing with the Apple Watch, like things like that. And people are trying to move in a way that they can use devices in the cloud where they can do the same thing. So there's a trend of like, I don't know, like how to test the camera in a phone that is in the cloud, and how to scan documents, all those things that are like part of the daily life in the digital world. So I think there is a trend in that side of mobile to do that, and especially to figure out how those mobile apps are behaving well in terms of performance, because the typical example is kids playing games with phones that were given by their parents that are 5 years old. So the phone is 5 years old, and then a game has to perform well. That's a typical example why you have to test performance. So I think there is a trend in mobile testing that also covers that and involves specifically a company like Sauce Labs.
Thank you. Where do you see the future of automated testing heading in the next 5 years, particularly with advancements in AI and machine learning?
I mean, we have V0, the platform from Vercel that allows you to build, like to create a prompt and it builds your website. I think something like that powerful can be for test creation, but mostly for test analyzing or like application analyzing, where you run automated tests automatically in the cloud on a customer application, and you just automatically find where the problem is and automatically can, if access to the code, like provide a change set. I think that's like creating this automation loop is the ultimate like goal that we always had. And I think with AI, we get the primitives to actually solve that.
So I've seen companies pitching ideas like figuring out which tests you should run based on commits specific, so limiting so that you're not running absolutely everything. I've seen companies offering solutions to investigate the failures you're getting to see if they're likely to be real issues that you need to investigate further, because flaky tests and failures are a potential issue. I actually am kind of expecting to see observability inform the testing that we need to do going forward. I think there's a lot of power in real-time production monitoring and getting information about what's actually affecting revenue from the website, and then feeding that back to what tests you need to run to make sure that you're not limiting things. Like right now we're having to figure out what bugs, what problems do we think might happen that will cause problems, and with observability monitoring, we could kind of actually see this is having a real impact on our bottom line, whether it would have been expected as a bug or not, and then feeding back, those are the tests that we need to have.
I have a follow-up question around AI and your work in maintaining the frameworks. Do you feel at all that the maintainers and these volunteers who are putting in the hard work to build out these beautiful frameworks, do you worry that they will start to become taxed and overextended by requests from people who are using generative AI to build tests but do not fully understand what they're writing and run into issues? Do you see that? Do you predict difficulties in the open source community because of folks using generative AI to run your frameworks?
Possibly. That's why I ask every expert that I see who has an understanding about AI how I can write my documentation so that those models can be trained well and use stuff in a good way.
You have a good answer to that? Let's talk later.
Those AIs can generally read API contracts too, so they can study how the API actually works in order to provide somewhat decent answers, I think. So that should help.
That was a really good answer.
Yeah, well, I think that the purpose of like a framework or a library like Selenium or a framework like WebDriver is to make it extensible. So they are like the building blocks of an AI tool, and that's the purpose. So you can do it for AI, or if you want to have a locator that finds things based on image comparison. So that's the purpose of those frameworks. And the issue might be, like how people can develop a way of judging if what the AI is suggesting to you that this is actually an effective test and a sustainable and maintainable test. So I hope that in 5 years, the authoring problem of tests that are sustainable is resolved, because right now, the apps that are out there, they give you like the first iteration, but maintaining that is really complicated. So, because when the application changes, you have to change the code and all the like. So I think the idea basically is that we have to go in line. Like we should not only plug AI in the testing part, but maybe when the requirements, when the description of the problem is happening, then that those models understand that context, and then they can suggest proper tests as well.
I really think that this will benefit from projects having like design goals, design limitations. Selenium has very set definition list of things it will and won't do. Like we don't provide HTTP status codes, we don't provide API testing. It has a set of boundaries, and I think that the LLMs that I've seen understand those boundaries because it's documented somewhere. So documenting those design principles, I think, will help a lot. Like, for example, the first time I ever worked with ChatGPT, I asked it, write me a Selenium script that will buy this particular book from Amazon. And it basically said, I can get you up to the point of hitting the button, but there is no way I'm giving you code that actually buys the book, because there's a lot of stuff that could go into that and could cause harm, and I'm not doing that. And I felt like it's because some people out there wrote blog articles and content that said, don't do this. And so it sort of figured it out by the stuff it was trained on. So hopefully we can keep putting, if we train the algorithm and that training happens to include things that include the design goals and the more moral implications, then maybe it will also include that training and work it in. Maybe.
Since you brought up ChatGPT, I'm just going to throw this out here. I'm going to let you behind the what is it, the fourth wall, third wall? One of those walls. We are so used to doing this on our computers. ChatGPT has become a bit of a crutch.
Yeah, it's our fifth host. It's to be here with us today.
Always. So this is a little different, not using ChatGPT. Okay, so does anybody have a question? And then we'll go back to our regularly scheduled questions.
I have a question.
There you go.
What advice do you have for us relative to getting more of our workload beyond Selenium and Appium to the other frameworks that the community is loving using?
All right. What advice do you have for basically usage of other frameworks besides Selenium and Appium?
I just need more context. So, because mostly we are experiencing it in browser frameworks, are we talking about frameworks about like checking security issues, like accessibility, perhaps?
The idea that if our goal is to with the exception of, what is it, don't test all things or whatever from this morning, but really enable the community to drive up test coverage across multiple domains so that ultimately they're releasing a much higher quality performant app by any means. We should find ways to make that easier to do and not limit them and the limitations that come from Selenium now.
Yeah,
How do we make it a priority to benefit the community by supporting some of these other frameworks that would enable it?
So how do we make it a priority to let the community benefit from all the other kinds of testing that are being performed with these different frameworks? How is that possible to encourage that use?
Well, I think that in general, we have been focusing a bit too much in functional testing over the years, and we're missing opportunities such as using the same tests we run daily to also do accessibility testing and to do security testing, and most of the time it's just adding a plugin because, as we were mentioning a moment ago, most of these frameworks are extendable. So they allow a plugin to come and check how accessible the website is. And this is becoming very important because, who said that? Was that you, Marcus, that there is some legislation coming up in Europe that all websites have to be...
Yeah, it's June of 2025. There will be, like overnight, there will be a new set of regulations that are going to be enforced that require a certain level of accessibility in websites and software.
I mean, often it starts on the organization level, right? I mean, if a company starts rolling out test plans for their software, often there's one software team, development team that has a favor for that framework and another team that has a favor for that framework. And I think that needs to be work in the organization level to say, hey, we want to roll out one framework across the whole organization, share like plugins that we built for it so we can better use the tool. And I think you all know, I mean, you are in the field, you have been seeing those organizations where like there's this lack of understanding that, you know, every team uses a different tool and they don't talk to each other. But if they could do so, they could leverage a lot of like, gain a lot of knowledge for that.
I do think that we have to be a little conscientious. Like, we are seeing some of these all-in-one frameworks that are trying to be a little bit of everything for everyone. And there are already like really good tools that are out there in different languages that, like, for instance, people ask sometimes, is Selenium going to support API testing? And I'm like, in every single language, there's a really good API test suite that already exists. And there's nothing preventing you from using Selenium and that implementation. They don't need to be in the same library to be effective. So part of it is understanding what tools are out there and bringing them together rather than, you know, trying to necessarily get an all-in-one solution. I think this goes back to understanding testing first and then the tool, rather than just trying to pick a tool that says it'll do everything and then try and figure out how to test based on that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, the problem to solve is the testing needs of the user. They want to test the application in certain ways, and I think we all want to like give them the means to that, which is whatever tool works best for that. And there are tools out there that are very specific for one use case, and tools where I see WebDriver is like it can support all these things. You can run desktop tests, you can run mobile tests, you can run extension, like you can test your VS Code extension with it because it wasn't possible before. And I think, it's like trying to have the customer problem first and then see what's the solution fits best.
Yeah, what I wanted to add was something that Christian was mentioning, which is sometimes when you want to have like the latest and the coolest tool, it's like derailing you from what you actually want to do for your team, which is like deliver a good product for the customer, deliver a great experience. And when you like have your tool chosen, you can find add-ons that can give you the security, the accessibility. Like the dream would be like to have a dashboard that you have different tabs, and one is telling you your visual checks passed, your security is okay, your accessibility is fine, the network is also fine, you don't have security issues. And that would be the dream, to have something like that. And you are using the same tool to run the same tests on a daily basis.
So one of the things that you have to understand about test case scenario is that we often go off script and all over the place. And it's kind of our thing. It's kind of fun. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. It usually works, if we don't say so ourselves. So I'm going to go off script. You guys ready? I thought it might be fun if we do a little lightning round in the middle here, just to change up stuff. We'll do yes or no answers only, and maybe give a thumbs up. Yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down. Sound good? Are you guys game? Yeah, thumbs up, thumbs up. Oh, that'd be weird if you gave a thumbs down. All right, cool. First question. Cyprus is dying. Everybody gave the thumb. I'm surprised. Is everybody surprised by that, or not really surprised?
There might be some bias here.
Okay. Do we want to clarify?
Well, I don't know that we're even expressing an opinion of whether we want it to die or not. I think that's what we're seeing, and
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
ask if y'all agree.
I mean, I don't really mind in terms of like, because I like Selenium and they were a bit harsh at the beginning, but I have a different point of view, which is it's an open source project that tried to build a business and they are failing to do that, which hurts me from the open source point of view. Like if you have an idea, you want to put it out, you want to build a community, and then you cannot monetize it, it breaks a bit my heart.
Nikolay.
By the end of the decade, AI will replace developers.
Come on. Not surprised.
Wow. You think it's gonna replace developers?
Just like crypto took over the world, Nick?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
I went.
Don't get Marcus started on crypto.
No,
I'm blockchain.
I don't know if it will replace all developers, but I can see a possibility where, with the rapid expansion of AI, the jobs that developers do today are not the same jobs that developers will do in the future. I potentially see, and I'm not saying this is the only path, I see an option where the future developer is a manager of bots collaborating together to achieve a higher level task versus someone that sits and bangs on a keyboard to crank out code. We'll have bots to crank out the code, orchestrate the code, and push it to production and monitor it, and we are the conductor of the symphony.
I agree with the first third of that, and then the second, you lost me.
well,
I'm curious. The audience, thumbs up or thumbs down? Do you agree with Nikolay?
Wow.
Oh, we'll change. in 10 years. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But he also said replace, or that developers will be managing bots. Instead of.
I mean, to a certain extent,
people.
I don't think we know what all solutions are going to be made possible from AI. The problem set is going to expand so much, and there's going to be so many opportunities that AI makes available, and we don't even know what they are yet. That kind of the singularity idea. We don't know what's on the other side of the exponential growth that AI is going to generate.
I don't know that I'm not managing a bunch of bots. That we're not managing a bunch of bots right now. You can't prove it.
So I just want to call out for the people watching too. The room was relatively mixed. I saw a lot of thumbs down, but I also saw thumbs up. So just want to bring them in on that. Okay, Evelyn.
There is not a single listener or audience member who should reach out and get involved in open source. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I was going to say you just confused me, but I think
I know. I was trying to make it tricky.
So say no to the not. Not.
Yeah.
No to not.
I didn't know.
That's like one of those questions on the test that they want you to fail.
All right, I'll ask it the easy way.
I'm not an
You
native
think
speaker.
every single listener and every audience member that's listening today out here should get involved in the open source community? Titus, that's the wrong way. We're not asking for your opinion.
Clarify.
No, I think that there's a certain amount of passion and excitement that I want to see people bring to the projects. And if that's not their cup of tea, I don't want to browbeat people into.
They can still do documentation.
But some people don't like to do documentation and don't like to write code and don't want to help project manage things.
And are toxic.
I appreciate any and all help that we can get. There's a lot of things non-technical things that open source projects are sorely lacking, and I would love to get more participation. And I will never turn someone away, and I try and mentor everyone that comes. But everyone feels a little
No,
much.
I think open source is not just contributing to the project, but for example, if you're a great host, like Jason, for example, you could easily organize an event for an open source project, and that's already contributing to open source. Like if you are a person who likes to do design, you can do a one-time logo, and that's a contribution. So everyone who has any skill can get closer to open source, and I don't see why not.
Yeah, the work I do for the Selenium project is mostly around conference organization, budgeting, trademark protection, legal protection, copyright enforcement, stuff that most developers don't want any part of, right?
That said, I also met a lot of very talented engineers in my career. They never have contributed any single line of code to open source. And that's totally fine because open source is just an ends to, it's just a vehicle that can allow you to learn and grow, but you can learn and grow in different ways. And if open source is not that
And I want to add one more thing too, and this is to Christian's credit, his project is doing work better than other open source projects I've seen to actually monetize and provide remuneration back to contributors, because that's another thing that the open source community has struggled with is we're demanding free labor, right? Like who are we to demand that someone give up their time and their precious, experience to do things for us if we can't find ways to give back. And so that's something that the open source community needs to figure out the same way as well.
Yeah, and that's why Sauce Labs is so proud of the support that we've given to WebDriver.io, and that WebDriver.io then turned that and gave it back to the community. I think that's exactly how it should go, and kudos to Christian for doing that. And I'll just add, I think it's incredibly important that we get more contributors to open source that are passionate, to Titus's point, and that the projects need to be an open, welcoming place for them to go. Encouraging participation for new participants. It's really hard to get involved, and there are so many roles, and we need to talk about the various roles. It's not just code, and you can get involved regardless of your experience, and we need to really talk about that more and more, I think.
I realized that when I paid out the first people that make use of the WebDriver stipend when they contribute a PR, the minimum we get back is $25. But while $25 might not be much for a person here in California, I realized I donate out to people that live in Pakistan or other parts of the world where that amount is kind of like a lot, and it can be a vehicle to bring also the new generation of engineers that get access to computers to be excited about coding and contribute to a meaningful thing.
Awesome. Marcus, would you like to ask your lightning round question?
Selenium is a test framework. Yes or no?
I'm just going to do what everyone else.
Discuss.
It's a browser automation framework, or it's a browser automation library. It's a toolkit for you to do anything that a user interacting with the browser can do. And there are a lot of testing specific things, assertions, synchronization, opinions that are necessary to do testing that Selenium doesn't provide out of the box.
Yeah, the big problem is that Selenium as a project, 20-year-old project, hasn't invested much to make that clear. And that brought a huge confusion to the community. But we plan to invest more in that during the next.
Right, so that's where my question is tied to the concept that we've been seeing for the past 5-6 years. There's all these articles about Cypress versus Selenium, which is better, and it's a completely inappropriate comparison done purely to make clicks.
My framework that I wrote on top of Selenium is better than all of that, but someone else's built on top of Selenium might struggle.
Right.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is the distinction here, and for those of us in the audience who might be kind of on my level of technical understanding, is the distinction here that you can use Selenium to kind of control the browser to build a framework on top of that to do anything? It doesn't have to be testing. You could use it for ticket scalping. Or
a lot of Selenium users use it for web scraping.
Web scraping, that was the less nefarious example that I was about to say.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, the truth is that Selenium is a library that lets you control a browser using robotic commands, and it does that exactly the way you tell it to. Whereas a tool like Cypress Test Cafe was designed to be a testing tool, which means that when you say find an element, it's going to know I'm in a testing context. I really need to make sure that element exists before I actually try to interact with it. Whereas Selenium is just going to say, oh, you want me to find an element? There it is. Or there it's not. And if I throw an error. And so you have to engineer the tests around the commands to make it test like and test semantic, because it's not purpose built to be a testing library. It's like you're being given the engine of a car and told you got to go build a car, whereas the other frameworks you can drive just when you sit in them.
It wouldn't be a test case scenario if we didn't hear a Marcus metaphor
About cars.
Well, so I think one of you, was that you, Diego, that mentioned that we haven't done a good enough job of like clarifying that in the past. Is there a statement you want to make while you have a captive audience about the true purpose of Selenium and the distinction?
There is a huge ecosystem around WebDriver. So what we're trying to do in the Selenium project, and we plan to do that in the next month in our website and so on, is to tell people, don't use Selenium. Use something built on top. There are frameworks that have all the features you want that already exist in Playwright, Cypress, and the others. Or if you like JavaScript, then use WebDriver.io. Like, we don't really care that you don't use Selenium directly. We care that you're successful in your testing. So that's what is important for us. And something I wanted to add about the web scraping, I now kind of think that maybe web scraping is the first use of Selenium, because we added, we're recording usage of Selenium, and in the most recent 2 versions, we see that Python is the most used one, and South Korea is the country that uses the most Selenium in the recent 2 versions. And one good data point I want to share is that in the last 30 days, we have seen that Selenium has 1.2 million active users. So let's see how that goes in the next 6 months.
That's huge.
Amazing.
Let's applaud the 1.2 million. That's awesome.
And the other thing I just want to add on to what Diego is saying is the entire WebDriver ecosystem is focused on supporting the whole idea of the open web. So there are a lot of open source projects out there that are based on, that are maintained by specific companies or have other business models. And Selenium is really trying to be a community-driven, community-supporting library and project that does the right thing for everyone. So that means even though WebDriver.io is a completely different project, we support it. And we encourage its use. And all libraries that are built on top of any WebDriver implementation, I support and I encourage.
Yeah, and one example of that is there is a feature that was requested for many years in WebDriver, which is accessing the shadow root. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but it was implemented in Chrome, in Firefox, but then Safari was missing. So Selenium used money from the project to pay a consultancy company to implement it in WebKit, and then this landed in Safari, because in the end, we just want the whole community to have a successful browser automation experience. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you all. We'd like to take one last audience question.
There you
Matt
go.
has a question.
So you're all extremely experienced in the software development and software testing world. What advice would you give to somebody new starting their career within testing?
Great question.
I'll just repeat the question really quickly for the audio listeners. So Matt asks that they're all very experienced in automated software testing. What advice would they give to new people starting out in automated software testing?
Everyone who's using WebDriver, I always advise to look under the hood and see what WebDriver is doing to learn when stuff goes wrong, that know how to fix that. I think that has been very valuable to many people, that, when you only use a tool, when you drive a car and you drive and it's broken and you don't know how to fix it because you never looked under it, right? And so I think a good advice would be just to maybe get involved in the project and be able to contribute back. It's one thing, but at least find out how the project works and what it does under the hood so you can understand better what's going on.
Yeah, I think my suggestion is to perhaps focus more in learning how to test, because before jumping into the testing ecosystem, I was a full-time developer. When I moved to Germany, my job was as a QA, as an automation QA. And I didn't do well because I just wrote too many tests. I was testing everything, and that just like affected us more than gave us like a benefit. So, and then I started to read a bit and understand better, and then I realized that everything doesn't have to be tested. So I feel that maybe learning the fundamentals is better than jumping into the tools right away. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, so it's two parts for me is learn how to test well before diving into like specific tooling, or like what is the point of testing? What things do we have to test to achieve those objectives? What does good look like? What does sufficient look like? And then from the tooling standpoint, as far as getting involved, we always suggest like take a look at the documentation. Like I started running tests for water when I first got involved with writing, tooling. I just started running the tests and seeing what failed, figuring out why it failed, run it on Windows, and all of a sudden things fail. It's like, all right, why did those fail? Things like that, and just went from there.
My advice would be never forget who you're serving through your tests, and never forget that testing is fundamentally about risk management, risk to your users, risk to your business. And that's the thing that I think that a lot of people rabbit hole on getting super into the tech details and trying to make sure that they cover some edge case for some academic reasons because they expect to get some cookies out of it or something. But the truth is, you're serving a real user who has a real problem to solve or a real game to play, and that it's about risk management.
Wow. We have a question from the audience. Paloma.
How do you, as a user, navigate through this big sea of possible frameworks to help advocate for open standards? How do you know the framework that you like uses the open standards? And why would you choose that? I get the feeling that it makes more reliable. Like if you're starting a project and you're adding your framework, you don't want the project to die in the next month or a year and redo it again. So you would want to choose the open standards. But how do you know?
I think I've seen us look at, the recency of the involvement on the framework, right? Like how recent were the issues looked at? How recent were the commits? How many versions have come out in the last bit? I've seen the solutions architects at Sauce Labs use that as sort of a starting point. So you're brand new, you've got an idea of what you think you want to look at, and then you can look at the tool and see how active it is. Just because something has a lot of users and a lot of popularity, or it might be the way it's been done before, doesn't mean, like to you, what your point is, that it's going to be that standard, it's going to be that popular forever. And if you're depending on that volunteer force to help you with your job by contributing, then I think it's important to also look at how active the community is around that project. Does anybody have a different opinion on that?
I would add how big the community contributions is outside of a commercial entity that might be associated with it. So is it actually community, or is it a community of 3 developers who are also monetizing the framework?
And I think that's the issue for me is, are we working together collaboratively to make things better? One of my favorite quotes is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so we want not to do something that browsers aren't going to do. We want to work with the browser vendors. We don't want to create our own BiDi implementation and inject it into a browser. We want to work with the browser vendors on what they want for a BiDi implementation and make sure that we all agree on the right things to do. And I think finding the solutions that are working with the W3C, browser tools working group, and are looking to include all of the voices in the community is what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question and very hard to answer because it's a very romantic idea to think that people will look at the repository and all the commits and all that first, because most of the time people don't really care if it works for them, they just use it. But there's an opportunity there to kind of educate and let people know that, okay, if you see a project and you see that it's owned by a non-profit organization, then maybe it's a good chance that it's not going to be jeopardized by something like, okay, I'm going to block users because I need them to pay money to me, or things like that. So that's a good hint, like who owns the project. And then, check the activity. But I also feel that, or I have seen users that, if it works for me, I don't really care. I just will use it, and we'll see how it goes. So it's a complicated thing in the end to put into the reality.
One ad to detect a sustainable project or not is whether or not projects have governance structures. And you see a lot of commercial products where it's basically owned by the corporation, and they don't really care. Like, they have their defined way how to operate on the project, but they don't disclose that. And, big, large open source projects like Linux, they all have big governance policies, and this makes all sure that the project can run, and everything is transparent and clear to people that participate.
Thank you so much to the panel. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I feel like we could keep going forever, but this has been really special having all of you on stage together. It's been really amazing doing it live in front of an audience together. We've never done that before. Thank you to Titus Fortner, Christian Bromann, Diego Molina, and to the panel, Marcus Merrell, Evelyn Coleman, and Nikolay Advolodkin. And thank you to our live audience. Thank you to our audience at home. And this has been another episode of Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.